I didn't realize I was being tested until my mother-in-law handed me a glass of champagne and the whole table went silent. Ethan didn't touch his sister looked down like she was trying not to smile, and Victoria watched me with the calm precision of someone who already knew the outcome. That was the moment I understood. I hadn't married into a family. I had been seated inside a controlled experiment. I married into the Caldwell family on a warm evening in Napa Valley. Everything about that wedding screamed perfection. The dress was custom, something between Dior and old money elegance. The venue? A private vineyard owned by someone who casually mentioned golfing with CEOs. The guests? People who didn't ask what you did. They asked who you controlled. And me? I was the outsider. The girl who didn't belong. At least, that's what they thought. My husband, Ethan Caldwell, was charming, in the way expensive men often are precise, attentive, and never sincere for longer than necessary. Like he had learned exactly when to smile, when to touch your hand, when to whisper the right words. I chose you, he told me that night, as we stood under strings of golden lights. Not, I love you. I chose you. At the time, I thought it was romantic. Now, I know that was the first test. The second test came 3 days after the honeymoon breakfast. His mother, Victoria Caldwell, sat across from me at a long marble table that probably cost more than my old apartment. She poured coffee slowly, watching me. So, Elena, she said, her voice soft but precise. What exactly did you leave behind to marry into this family? It sounded like curiosity. It was a measurement. I smiled. A life that taught me not to confuse wealth with value. She nodded, but her eyes said, she has nothing. That was when I started noticing the pattern. They weren't just judging me. They were testing me constantly. Dinner invitations where I was deliberately underdressed. Business conversations where they dropped terms just obscure enough to confuse me. Subtle remarks about people who marry above their level. Victoria changed the dress code for a charity dinner and made sure I never got the message. I walked in wearing silk cocktail-length Valentino, while every other woman in the room stood draped in black tie couture. Ethan saw it. He knew, and he still kissed my cheek like nothing was wrong. Later that night, and he told me I should have asked before assuming I understood the room. That was when I realized he wasn't embarrassed for me. He was disappointed I hadn't performed better. His sister leaned in and whispered, "Don't worry. Elena, confidence can make almost anything look intentional." Half the table laughed into their glasses. I smiled back. That was the night I stopped wondering whether they disliked me, and started measuring how far they were willing to go. Even Ethan played along. He would squeeze my hand under the table, while letting his sister dismantle me sentence by sentence, and every time, they watched, not with cruelty, but with curiosity, like I was a case study. The third test was almost brilliant. They took me to a private club in Manhattan, the kind where people wore Rolex watches, like they were accessories, not statements. Victoria handed me a menu, no prices. Of course, I ordered something simple. She smiled. Ethan's sister ordered the most expensive bottle of wine without blinking, then glanced at me, waiting, measuring. Ethan didn't stop her. He just watched me, the way men watch a fire they secretly hope will spread. That night, in the car, Ethan finally spoke. "You don't have to pretend," he said casually. "My family, they value transparency." Transparency, right. I turned to him, and What exactly am I pretending to be? He hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. That was the moment I understood everything. This wasn't a family, this was a system, and I wasn't a wife. I was a variable, so I did what no one expected. I stopped trying to pass their tests and started designing my own. I let them think I was overwhelmed. I let them think I didn't understand their world. I let them believe every whisper they made behind closed doors was true. Because the more they underestimated me, the more honest they became. Victoria began speaking more openly around me. Ethan stopped filtering his conversations. His sister, she didn't even bother hiding her contempt anymore. Perfect. Exactly what I needed. Because while they were testing how much I could endure, I was mapping everything, their alliances, their weaknesses, their habits, their secrets, and the biggest secret of all, they thought I married into their power. They didn't realize I had walked away from something bigger. 3 months later, Victoria invited me to what she called a family review dinner. Everyone was there. Executives, lawyers, even a man I recognized from a Tesla board event I had attended years ago. Interesting. Very interesting. Dinner was flawless. Until dessert. That's when she did it. She handed me a glass of champagne and said, "Let's see how you handle pressure." The room went quiet. Subtly, strategically, everyone watching, waiting, testing. I took the glass, smiled, and for the first time since I married into that family, I let them see something real. Not fear, not confusion, not hesitation. Recognition. Because in that moment, I finally understood the game they had been playing. And I knew something they didn't. They weren't the only ones running tests. I raised the glass slightly, looked directly at Victoria, and said, calmly, "Careful. You might not like the results." Then I drank. Ethan's hand tightened around the stem of his untouched glass. Victoria didn't blink, but her smile disappeared. For the first time, the room wasn't studying me. It was recalculating risk. And that was the moment everything started to change. The champagne didn't taste like victory. It tasted like a decision. I didn't flinch, didn't hesitate, didn't even slow down. I drank it like I had nothing to prove, which confused them. I could see it. That tiny flicker in Victoria's eyes. The first crack, because they expected something else. A pause, a doubt, a mistake, but I gave them nothing. And that's when they changed the rules. The next morning, the house had gone strategically silent. No messages, no calls, no breakfast invitation, nothing. I walked into the kitchen. Empty, no staff, no coffee, no sign of life. My phone still worked. But 2 meetings I hadn't canceled had somehow disappeared from my calendar. That was when I understood they weren't ignoring me. They were testing how I behaved when access was removed. Interesting. They were escalating. So I played along. I made my own coffee in the empty kitchen and let the silence do what they hoped it would do. It didn't break me. It clarified them. By noon, Ethan finally called. His voice was light. Too light. "Hey, everything okay this morning?" I almost laughed. He wasn't checking on me. He was checking the result. Men like Ethan never ask how much something hurts unless they want to know whether it worked. I smiled. Even though he couldn't see it, of course. Why wouldn't it be? A pause? Small, but sharp? He was checking the effect, not the damage. I just thought it might have been a bit overwhelming last night. He said it too carefully. Like someone repeating language that had already been approved in another room. There it was. The script? I leaned against the counter. Overwhelming? I repeated softly. No. Ethan, I think I'm starting to understand things. Another pause. Longer this time. Understand what? I let silence stretch. Just enough to make him uncomfortable. Your family. I said. Then I hung up. That was my first move. Confuse the observer. Because once they don't know what you're thinking, they start revealing what they're hiding. And they did faster than I expected. That afternoon, Victoria invited me to lunch. Private. Of course, she chose a place that screamed control, a rooftop restaurant overlooking the city. Minimalist. Perfect. She arrived early, already seated, already watching. Elena, she said smoothly, I hope this morning wasn't inconvenient. Translation, did you break? I sat down across from her. Perfect posture, calm hands, steady breath. Not at all. I said, then I picked up the menu, didn't look at it. I've always enjoyed figuring things out on my own. Her lips curved slightly. Approval? Adjustment? She was recalibrating me because I was doing the same to her. Lunch went on like a performance. Every question she asked had 2 meanings. Every answer I gave had 3, until she finally asked the real one. Tell me, Elena? Victoria said, folding her napkin with elegant precision. When you chose Ethan, what exactly did you think you were gaining? Not, do you love him? Not, are you happy? Why him? A test of motive. I tilted my head slightly, as if I had to think about it. Then I smiled. Measured. Because he chose me. Her eyes sharpened. She remembered that line. And that was enough? She asked. I leaned forward slightly. Just enough to shift the energy. No, I said quietly. But it was interesting. That did it. That was the moment she realized I wasn't reacting the way I was supposed to, and that made me dangerous. She reached for her water but didn't drink. It was small, almost invisible. But women like Victoria only touch the glass when they need time, so they escalated again. That night, they tried to break me. For real. A family gathering. Unannounced, unavoidable. When I walked into the living room, everyone was there. Ethan, his sister, Victoria, 2 lawyers, and a man I recognized immediately. Not from this family. From before, he didn't react, didn't acknowledge me. He understood because this was no longer their test. This was mine. Victoria gestured for me to sit. Deliberate. Elena, she said. We thought it was time to have a transparent conversation. There it was again. That word, transparent. The sister smirked. Ethan stayed quiet. The lawyers watched, and then Victoria placed a folder on the table, thick, structured, prepared. We did a background check, she said calmly. Of course they did. And we couldn't find anything significant. She looked at me, smiling. That concerns me. Silence. Heavy. Calculated. They were waiting for panic. For defense. For explanation. For exactly 1 second. I understood what they wanted. Panic. Denial. Pleading. I gave them the opposite. Instead, I reached for the folder, opened it, flipped through the pages, slowly, carefully. Then I closed it and smiled. You missed a few things. The room shifted, just slightly, but enough. Victoria's eyes narrowed. What exactly do you think we missed? I leaned back, relaxed. Nothing important. I said lightly. Just the parts that weren't meant to be found. That was the second move. Let them know there's more, but don't show it, because uncertainty is more powerful than truth. Victoria didn't speak, but I could see it. For the first time, she wasn't testing me. She was trying to understand me. And that meant one thing. I was winning, but the real trap hadn't even started yet. Because what they didn't know was that the man sitting quietly in that room wasn't there for them. He was there for me. This story contains fictionalized elements for entertainment and educational purposes. The room didn't move, but everything inside it shifted. Victoria was still watching me, but not the same way anymore. Before, she observed. She was calculating. That meant she finally saw me as a threat. And threats get tested harder. Then help us understand, she said slowly, her fingers resting on the folder like it still meant something. What exactly did we miss? Everyone leaned in, subtly. Even Ethan. Especially Ethan. I could feel it. That silent pressure. That expectation. That need for me to finally explain myself. So I gave them something, just not what they expected. I turned my head slightly, looked at the man sitting quietly across the room. He hadn't spoken once, hadn't moved, hadn't even looked at me directly. Until now, our eyes met just for a second. That was enough. He stood up, and suddenly, the energy in the room snapped. Victoria's sister frowned. Ethan straightened. The lawyers exchanged a glance because this man was not supposed to move. "Excuse me," he said calmly, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Then he placed a small black folder on the table. Not theirs. Victoria didn't touch it. "What is this?" she asked. He didn't answer her. He looked at me, waiting. I nodded once. Permission granted. He opened the folder, turned it, pushed it toward them, and that's when I saw it. The exact moment everything cracked, because printed on the first page wasn't a family office logo or some discreet boutique fund. It was the kind of institutional structure that makes powerful people sit straighter, not because they understand all of it, but because they understand enough. And buried in the ownership layers, control roots. And proxy vehicles was my name. It wasn't the kind of structure people inherit by accident. It was the kind powerful families spend decades trying to reach. Silence. Not the kind they controlled, the kind that controls you. Ethan blinked first. "That's not possible." He said it like a man replaying every dinner, every touch, every private conversation, and realizing he had never once been the one holding power. Of course that's what he said, because in their world, power was visible, traceable, inherited. Mine wasn't. Victoria didn't speak, but her hand tightened slightly on the table. She was reading faster now, skipping lines, connecting pieces, and realizing something very, very wrong. "You're saying," one of the lawyers started carefully, "that Elena has indirect controlling interest in." I raised a hand. He stopped immediately. Not because I was loud, because I didn't need to be. "I'm not saying anything," I said softly. Then I leaned back. "I'm just correcting your data." That was the moment, the exact second. The power shifted, not dramatically, subtly, like gravity changing direction. Ethan looked at me differently now. Not like a husband, like a man trying to remember if he ever actually knew the person sitting across from him. "You lied," his sister said sharply. I turned to her, smiled. "No," I said calmly. You built a story with missing facts and called it truth? That landed harder because it was true. Victoria finally closed the folder. Slowly, carefully, as if slamming it would admit something. You hid this? She said. There it was. Not confusion. Accusation. I tilted my head slightly. Did you ask? One of the lawyers lowered his eyes. Another stopped taking notes altogether. Victoria noticed both things. That was the first time she had ever lost authority in a room without anyone raising their voice. That was the first humiliation. Small, precis, but surgical. The lawyers shifted in their seats because now they weren't advising her. They were recalculating me. Victoria exhaled slowly. Then she did something unexpected. She smiled. Not polite, not fake, strategic. I see, she said quietly. So that's why you weren't reacting. I didn't answer. She leaned forward. Then let me ask you something else. Elena? Her voice dropped slightly. If you're so powerful, she paused. Why did you let us test you for months? The room went still again. Because that was the real question. And finally, I gave them the truth, just a piece. I needed to see who you were. I said. Then I looked directly at Ethan. Before I decided what to do with you. He looked at me like a man trying to calculate when his life had stopped being his idea. That was the second crack. Because now, this wasn't about acceptance anymore. This was about consequence. The man beside me closed the folder, stepped back, silently, exactly how he had entered, and just like that, the test was over, but the game had just begun. Because what they didn't realize was that everything they had done to me was already being used against them. And tonight, I had just activated the first piece, the smallest one. No one spoke after that. Ethan reached for his glass and realized his hand was shaking. His sister noticed. Victoria noticed that she noticed. No one said anything. But silence had changed sides. Not immediately. Because once truth enters a room like that, it doesn't explode. It settles quietly, heavily, like something permanent. Victoria was the first to recover. Of course she was. She adjusted her posture, straightened her glass, smiled. If that's true, she said calmly, then I suppose we've underestimated you. Not an apology. Never that. A repositioning. I nodded slightly. Most people do. That could have been the moment I pressed harder, took control openly, but I didn't, because power, real power, doesn't rush. It waits. Dinner ended not with confrontation, but with recalibration. No one challenged me again that night. They didn't need to. By then, the room had already understood the new problem. I wasn't someone to embarrass anymore. I was someone to contain. Victoria stopped asking direct questions. Instead, she observed more carefully. Ethan spoke less, but when he did, he chose his words, like they mattered now. His sister, she tried to pretend nothing had changed, but she avoided looking at me for too long, because deep down, she knew she had already lost something, she just didn't know what yet. And me, I let them think they were adapting, because adaptation creates patterns, and patterns can be used 3 days later. Victoria invited me to her office, not the house. Not a restaurant, her office. That told me everything. This wasn't social anymore. This was strategic. The building was exactly what you'd expect. Glass, steel, silence. The kind of place where decisions are made and consequences are hidden. I stepped out of the elevator. Immediately noticed the details: receptionist posture, security placement, camera angles, nothing new, just confirmation. Victoria was already inside, standing by the window, looking out over the city. She didn't turn when I walked in. "You're very good," Victoria said. In another woman's mouth, it might have been admiration. In hers, it sounded like a threat, with perfect posture. I closed the door behind me. Slowly. "So are you," I replied. That made her turn, and for the first time, there was no performance in her face. Just focus. "You didn't just hide your background," she said. "You structured it?" I didn't deny it, because denying truth lowers value. She walked toward her desk, picked up a tablet, turned it slightly. On the screen, financial flows, corporate layers, cross holdings, and somewhere in that network, beside the screen, two names I recognized from my side of the world had already been flagged. She wanted me to see that, not as proof, as a warning. "You've been in proximity to us long before the marriage," she continued. "Not a question. A conclusion." I smiled faintly. "Proximity is a matter of perspective." She studied me. "Longer this time? You chose this family?" "Yes." "Why?" That question again, but now it meant something different. I walked past her, stood by the window, looked out at the city. "Because you're predictable." That landed harder than anything else I'd said. Victoria didn't react immediately, but I could feel it. That shift from control to awareness. "We built everything we have on precision," she said quietly. I nodded. "And that's exactly why you're easy to read." Silence, heavy, because for the first time, she wasn't evaluating me. She was recalculating herself. That was when I knew the balance had changed quietly. Internally, and in the only place that ever really matters, the trap didn't trigger with noise. It triggered with timing. 2 days later, Ethan called me, not casually, not lightly, urgently. "Can we talk?" he asked. Of course we could. I had been waiting. We met at a quiet place downtown. Minimal, private, the kind of place where conversations matter more than appearances. He looked different. Not weaker, but uncertain. "I need to understand something," he said. I didn't answer. I let him continue. He looked exhausted. Not because he loved me, because uncertainty had finally reached him personally. Men like Ethan can survive scandal. What they can't survive is realizing they were never special. "Were you ever real with me?" he asked. I almost answered too quickly. Then I remembered the dress code dinner. The silence at the table. The way he kept touching my hand in public while feeding me to his family in private. I held his gaze, didn't blink. "Yes," I said. "More real than you ever were with me." That was the moment, the exact second. He realized something irreversible. He never knew me. And worse, he was never in control. I stood up, smoothed my coat, a clean, understated piece from Saint Laurent. Then I looked down at him, composed and completely untouchable. "You weren't testing me." "Ethan," I said, "you were showing me how little you were worth once power entered the room." Then I walked away, and I didn't look back, because I already knew he would. Victoria Caldwell didn't lose control. She redesigned it. That's the difference between amateurs and people like her. She didn't confront me, didn't accuse me, didn't even acknowledge what had happened. Instead, she disappeared. For 3 days, no calls, no massage, no invitations, Nothing, to most people, that would feel like peace. To me, it felt like a warning. Because when someone like Victoria goes quiet, they're not retreating. They're preparing. I didn't chase, didn't react, didn't adjust my behavior. Because that's what she wanted. Instead, I stayed exactly the same, routine, predictable, visible. Because the most dangerous move in a psychological game is breaking your own pattern, and I don't make that mistake. On the fourth day, it happened. Not publicly, not dramatically, quietly, precisely, exactly how she operates. I received an email, no sender name, no subject line, just one attachment. A document, at first glance. It looked ordinary. Legal formatting. Clean structure. Professional language. Then I saw the trail, the timing, the architecture of it. By the second page, I stopped breathing for a moment, not because it was true, because it was built well enough to survive contact with people who wanted it to be true. That was the danger, not evidence, believability. The irregularity was buried deep inside a network of holdings, layered. Precise. Hard to explain in one sentence and easy to weaponize in 3. And the most important detail, the trail led close enough to me to start the fire and far enough from the real source to keep the right people clean. This wasn't an attack. This was a narrative, and if it became public, it wouldn't prove I was guilty. It would make innocence look defensive. I read it twice. Then I set the phone down very carefully. Because only 2 kinds of moves are that clean: desperation or genius. And Victoria Caldwell was never desperate first, because this was the first real move Victoria had made, and it was good. So I did what she expected. Nothing. I didn't respond. Didn't investigate. Didn't confront. Because the moment you react to a trap, you confirm it exists. But that doesn't mean I ignored it. That night, I made one call to the only person in that room who had never been on her side. He picked up immediately. "I was wondering when you'd call," he said. Of course he was. "You've seen it?" I asked. "Yes," he said immediately. "And if this hits the wrong desks first, you won't get a second move." I said nothing. "Thoughts?" I asked. "It's clean," he said. "Too clean. If you misread this," he said, sharper. "Now, they won't isolate you socially. They'll isolate you structurally." That mattered. Social damage heals. Structural damage becomes history. Exactly. They want you to find it, he added. They want you to react. And if you react the wrong way, they won't just question you. They'll isolate you. I know. Silence. Then he asked the real question. "So what's your move?" I looked out the window, city lights reflecting in the glass, patterns, connections, possibilities. Then I said it. Certain. For the first time since I entered the Caldwell family, I had to calculate the possibility of losing, not socially, not emotionally, permanently. Then I made the decision. We let it spread. We let it spread. That was the moment the game changed again. Because Victoria thought she was setting a trap, but she didn't realize I had just turned it into a stage. 2 days later, the first leak appeared. Small, controlled, a niche financial forum. Anonymous source. Emerging concerns about undisclosed holdings. Nothing explosive. Just enough to start curiosity. Exactly how she would do it. But this time, I let it grow, didn't shut it down. Didn't clean it up. I fed it carefully, subtly, because when a story spreads naturally, it becomes believable, and when it becomes believable, it becomes dangerous. Victoria called me that night. Finally, Elena, she said smoothly. I assume you've seen what's circulating. There it was. The calm before escalation. Yes. I said, and you're not concerned? I smiled, even though she couldn't see it. Should I be? A pause? Small, but real, because that wasn't the answer she expected. You're either very confident, she said slowly, or very reckless. I leaned back, closed my eyes, or, I said softly, I just know something you don't. Silence, heavy, and for the first time, I heard it. Not control, uncertainty. But here's the truth. I wasn't fully in control. Not yet. Because what Victoria didn't know was that this move came with a cost, and if I miscalculated, even slightly, I wouldn't just lose the game. I would become the story. It spread exactly the way dangerous stories do, first in rooms that pretend to be small, then in rooms that pretend to be neutral. A financial thread, a private repost, a cautious mention, and within 48 hours, it was everywhere. Emerging financial inconsistencies, hidden ownership layers, unnamed individual tied to multi-structure capital flows. New names. No accusations. But everyone knew how to read between the lines, and that's all it takes. By the third day, it crossed into mainstream Ezigment on Bloomberg. Not a full expose. Not yet, just a developing situation. But the tone, that careful, neutral, interested tone, that's when you know it's real. My phone didn't stop vibrating. Unknown numbers, private calls, encrypted messages, people who never spoke to me directly. Suddenly, very interested in my availability. And inside the Caldwell system, pressure, immediate, relentless. Ethan showed up at my door that night. No warning, no message. Just there. You need to shut this down, he said the second I opened the door. Not, are you okay? Not, what's happening? Shut it down. I stepped aside, let him in, closed the door slowly behind him. Why? I asked calmly. He stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Because this isn't just about you anymore. He snapped. It's affecting everything. There it was. Not concern. Impact. Everything, I repeated. He exhaled sharply, ran a hand through his hair. Our investors are asking questions. Our partners are pulling back. Do you understand what that means? The first time he said, our investors, I realized he still thought I owed protection to people who had spent months trying to humiliate me. Not once did he ask whether I had been set up. Not once did he ask whether I was safe. He never cared whether it was true. He cared that it was expensive. He could tolerate cruelty. He just couldn't tolerate consequences. I walked past him, poured myself a glass of water, took my time, then turned back. Yes, I said. Silence, because he expected confusion, denial, not clarity. You're letting this happen, he said slowly. I didn't answer, because that silence was the answer. That was when he finally saw it. Not just what I was doing, but what I was willing to risk. This could destroy you, he said. I looked at him, steady, unmoved. I said quietly. It could destroy the right people. That was the moment he stepped back, not physically, internally, because now I wasn't unpredictable anymore. I was dangerous. The next morning, Victoria called an emergency meeting, not social, not private, structural, executives, legal, crisis management. And me, of course, the room felt different this time. Not controlled, contained, like something was about to break. Victoria stood at the head of the table, collected, but I could see it. That slight tension in her shoulders, even she felt it now. We are facing a narrative risk, she began. Not a legal one. Not yet. Smart. She understood the difference. This is about perception, she continued. And perception, if unmanaged, becomes reality. The room nodded. Then she turned to me. Elena. Just my name. Nothing else. Une invitation. A challenge. I stood up slowly, every movement deliberate, every second measured. Then I placed my phone on the table, unlocked, turned it toward them, a dashboard, real-time analytics, traffic flows, sentiment spikes. The movement on the screen wasn't chaotic. It was paced, nudged, amplified in the right rooms and slowed in the wrong ones, until the lie they had designed no longer belonged to them. You're right, I said calmly. This is about perception, silence, and perception. I continued. Is already moving. No one in the room looked at me first. They looked at the numbers. That's how you know power has changed hands. People stop studying your face and start studying your reach. Victoria stepped closer, eyes scanning the screen. And that's when she saw it. She started, then stopped because she understood. Too late. You didn't just let it spread, she said quietly. I smiled. I designed how it spreads. That was the moment, the exact second. The entire room shifted, because now, this wasn't damage control anymore. This was war, and they had just realized they weren't managing the crisis. They were inside it. They thought it would be internal, controlled, contained. They were wrong. The meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. Board level, confidential, only key executives, legal, crisis management, and me. Victoria insisted on full attendance, because in her mind, this was where she would take back control, reframe the narrative, stabilize the system. She didn't realize this wasn't her room anymore. I arrived early. Of course I did. The boardroom was exactly what you'd expect. Glass walls, long black table, city skyline behind it, the kind of place where power is supposed to feel absolute. I walked to the head of the table. Didn't sit, just observed. Screens, connections. Camera placement. Exactly as expected. The 57. Everyone was there. Victoria. Ethan. The lawyers. Executives. All in position. All thinking they were about to fix something. Victoria began. As of this morning, she said, voice steady. We will be addressing the current situation directly. Good, I said. The room paused, not because I interrupted, because I didn't ask permission. Victoria turned slowly. Elena, she said, controlled. You'll have your time. I smiled slightly. I know. 3 people in that building had already decided they were no longer loyal to Victoria. Not because of me, because power always leaks before it collapses. By the time the meeting began, I didn't need to break into the room. The room had already opened itself. I reached into my bag and placed a small black signal hub on the table. No one reacted at first. until the screens behind them flickered. Just once. Then again, "What did you do?" one of the executives asked sharply. I didn't answer, because the answer was already happening. The main display lit up, not with internal data, with a live feed, a viewer count climbing. The number rose too fast to feel private. 4 digits. Then 5. Then, fast enough that no one in the room wanted to read it out loud. Victoria stood up. "This meeting is private." "Not anymore?" I said calmly. That was the moment everything broke. Because what they didn't understand was that I hadn't just triggered a stream. I had connected this room to an audience. By the time the number hit 25, ling ling ling, the realization set in. Ad 25. 000 viewers. Ethan stopped pretending this was fixable. A chizich. Ling ling ling. His sister forgot to sit like a Caldwell. Atosuta. Ling ling ling. Victoria finally looked old. They weren't in control of the narrative anymore. They were the narrative. "Turn it off," Victoria said sharply. No one moved because no one knew how. I stepped forward, measured. "Go ahead," I said softly. "Explain." Silence. Because now, everything they said was evidence. Victoria's eyes locked onto mine. "You're making a mistake," she said quietly. I shook my head. "No," I replied. "I'm finishing one." The screen shifted. Documents appeared, clean, structured, undeniable. Ownership layers, financial flows, internal decisions, and then names. Their names. The room froze. Because this wasn't accusation anymore. This was exposure. "You tested me for months," I said calmly, measured my reactions, questioned my value. I looked around the table, met every pair of eyes, so I did the same. Click. Next file. Internal emails, private strategies, plans. About me. One of them was Ethan's. Short, efficient, cowardly. Let her keep talking. My mother wants to see how she reacts under pressure. Another one appeared beneath it. Short, efficient. Worse, if she starts crying, my mother will know she's not built for this family. His sister stopped breathing for a second when the next message appeared. If she embarrasses herself again at dinner, at least this one will finally be useful for something. Ethan looked like he couldn't breathe. His sister, completely still. The lawyers, no longer neutral. They were calculating liability. You wanted to know who I was. I continued. I turned back to Victoria. So I let you show me who you are first. That was the moment, the exact second, she lost control. Not visibly, not dramatically, but internally, because she understood something now, something irreversible. This wasn't damage, this was collapse. You think this ends well for you? She asked quietly. I stepped closer. It already did. The viewer count passed 100. Ling ling ling. Messages flooding. Clips being cut. Names being searched. It was out and it wasn't coming back. I reached for the final file, paused, looked directly at her. You built everything on control. I said, that was your genius. I looked at the final file on the screen, then back at her. It was also the reason you were so easy to dismantle. The screen changed. A single document, a signature, her signature, attached to something she thought no one would ever see. Silence. Absolute, because that was the end. I straightened, smoothed my sleeve, a quiet, effortless detail from Hermes catching the light. Then I looked at the room one last time. You weren't testing me, I said calmly. You were showing me exactly how to dismantle you. And then I walked out, leaving them exactly where they had placed me months ago, under observation. This story contains fictionalized elements for entertainment and educational purposes. The silence after exposure is never empty. It's echoing, because once the truth is out, it doesn't disappear. It multiplies. Within hours, clips from the boardroom were everywhere. Edited, reposted, analyzed. What really happened inside the Caldwell system? Who is Elena, really? My name, no longer a question. Now, a headline. The Wall Street Journal ran a piece within 12 hours. Not a full profile, just enough. Enough to make people look closer. And once people start looking, they don't stop. The Caldwell empire didn't collapse overnight. That would have been too clean, too easy. Instead, it fractured. Partners paused agreements. Investors requested audits. Internal divisions widened. 2 directors resigned within the month. A luxury partnership froze quietly and never returned. One lender demanded answers in writing. The Caldwell name still opened doors, just not the important ones, because the most dangerous kind of damage is doubt. Ethan tried to call me. More than once, I didn't answer, because some conversations only matter before the truth comes out. His sister? She disappeared from every social space she used to dominate. No posts, no appearances, nothing. Victoria. However, she fought. Of course she did. Statements, legal repositioning, narrative control. But there was a problem. She was reacting, and once you're reacting, you've already lost control. 3 weeks later, I received an invitation, private, from Victoria. I almost ignored it. Almost. But then I realized she wouldn't ask unless she had something left. So I went, same office, same city view, same woman, but not the same power. She didn't offer me a drink this time. That detail mattered more than anything she said. She didn't pretend this time. No performance, no elegance. Just calculation. You've made your point. She said, I didn't sit. I don't make points. I replied calmly, I make decisions. That hit, but she didn't react. She was still dangerous. She looked smaller than she had in the boardroom, not weaker. Just forced for the first time in years to speak from a position she did not control. That was new for her. And humiliating in a way no public scandal could fully capture. What do you want? She asked. Finally, the real question. I stepped closer. Nothing from you. I said, a pause. That confused her. Because in her world, everything has a price. Then why? She pressed. And that's when I gave her the truth. The full one. Because this was never about you. Silence. Heavy. I reached into my bag, placed a thin document on her desk. Not thick, not complex. Simple. She looked down, then froze because she recognized the format instantly. A controlling acquisition agreement, but not hers. Attached to it, a list of assets, companies, properties, networks, and at the center of it, the Caldwell infrastructure. You, she whispered. I tilted my head slightly. You are right about one thing. I said softly, you should have been concerned. While she was busy protecting the Caldwell name, pieces of the Caldwell structure had already started moving. Debt pressure, asset vulnerability, quiet exits. I didn't need to buy the whole machine at once. I only needed to own the parts it could no longer survive without. You didn't destroy us, she said slowly. I smiled. No. I said, I removed everything that made your empire look stronger than it was. That was the final humiliation. Not loud, not dramatic. Absolute, because in that moment, she realized something worse than losing. She had become part of my system. I turned to leave. But then, I stopped, just for a second. One more thing. I said. She didn't look up. Those weren't tests. Victoria, I said quietly. They were auditions. You just never realized you were the one being evaluated. And, without waiting, I walked out. 3 months later, the Caldwell name still existed, but not the way it used to. It was quieter, smaller, contained, and me, I stayed exactly where I belonged. Not in the spotlight, but behind it, because real power isn't about being seen. It's about being unavoidable.